she was his most trusted counsellor and his right hand. George R.R. Martin on Alysanne Targaryen. So Martin spoke, June 16, 2006. There have been many queens of Westeros, mostly women of House Targaryen, others from many different houses. All would leave an impact in their own way. All these queens share one thing in common. They were all consorts to ruling kings. Of course, you had the likes of Rhaenyra Targaryen, who, in her view, would be the first and only ruling queen of Westeros. And while there are those who do see her as this, from a purely historical point of view and the official canon kings and queens of Westeros, she is rightly or wrongly not considered a ruling queen. In reality, the closest we get to queens whom were more than just consorts are the likes of the sister wives of Aegon the Conqueror, Visenya and Rhaenys, who, while they were still officially consorts to Aegon, they held a lot of power, and they often ruled in Aegon's place. In many areas, Aegon gave them free rein to make decrees and important decisions. The influence and power of Visenya and Rhaenys cannot be understated, but what makes them so different from the other queens is their vital role in making the conquest happen, and the bringing of Westeros together as a single united kingdom under House Targaryen. For me, when we look outside of the conquerors, there is one queen who stands out above all others, and while she is still a consort to her king, she almost had a shared power with her brother and husband, thanks mostly to how she used her influence over her king, as well as her raw intelligence and determination to fundamentally change Westeros, striving for the betterment of all smallfolk and the rights of women. We are of course talking about good Queen Alysanne Targaryen. But the question I want to look at in this video centres around a simple idea. Was good Queen Alysanne really that good? First, a quick look at her background. Alysanne Targaryen was born in 36 AC, the fifth child and second daughter of King Rhaenys Targaryen and his wife Queen Alyssa Velaryon. It was said as a babe she was small, and thus she grew into a small adult, very slim with a slight frame. While she was undoubtedly pretty, few would call her as naturally beautiful as her elder sister Rhaena. She stands out as unusual among these early Targaryen rulers of Westeros. She did possess the flawless pale skin that her family was known for, but lacked many of the other traditional Valyrian traits. Rather than purple or violet eyes, Alysanne possessed a piercing blue. Her hair, rather than silver gold, was a more honey blonde colour, with large natural curls. She was undoubtedly Targaryen, but stood out amongst her kin. Alysanne was bright, but unremarkable as a young girl, with often little attention paid to her, given her position as the fifth born. She was courteous, and had a sweet smile and a pleasing voice. She was neither timid nor shy, nor did she have the willful or stubborn temperament of her elder sister. She was considered to be gentle, kind and loving by all that met her, and this would extend greatly to her people when she became queen. It was said that Alysanne learnt to read before she'd even been weaned. According to Septon Bath, she would have been sent to the citadel had she been a male. She had great wit, and all the chroniclers agree she made a powerful impression on those who met her through her high-spirited nature, charm, and keen intelligence. Maegor, the first of his name, came to the throne after the sudden death of his brother, King Rhaenys, in the year 42 AC. He is better remembered as Maegor the Cruel, and it was a well-earned sobriquet, for no crueler king has ever sat the Iron Throne. His reign began with blood and ended in blood as well. The writings of Yandel, the world of ice and fire, the Targaryen kings. After her father's sudden death in 42 AC, her uncle, Maegor, usurped the throne from her elder brother Aegon the Uncrowned. Alysanne and her brother, Jaehaerys, 2 years her elder, spent the next few years either as effective prisoners of Dowager Queen Visenya or on the run from Maegor until they eventually found themselves under the protection of Lord Rhaegar Baratheon of Storm's End, shortly before the death of Maegor in 48 AC. With all of his elder brothers dead, supported by Rhaegar Baratheon, the then 14-year-old Jaehaerys claimed the Iron Throne. Due to his age, however, his mother, Dowager Queen Alyssa, would serve as his regent, with Lord Rhaegar acting as his hand and Lord Protector until he came of age. During his minority, Jaehaerys would still test his authority as king. One of these matters was that of the arranged marriages of himself and that of his sister Alysanne. Following the Dowager Queen and Lord Rhaegar's wedding in 49 AC, the small council began to debate about a potential spouse for Jaehaerys and Alysanne. Still recalling the faith uprising that had followed the wedding of her children Rhaenys and Aegon, the Dowager Queen Alyssa decreed Alysanne and Jaehaerys should not wed to one another, and after Septa Matthias agreed that such a marriage would likely again inflame the pious of the realm, the council agreed to find other spouses for the siblings. The council was quick to agree on a husband for Alysanne, Sir Oren Baratheon, a brother to Lord Rhaegar. King Jaehaerys pulled his sister closer and put his arm around her. "But do not think that you shall unmake this marriage. We are one now, and neither gods nor man shall part us. Never," his bride affirmed. "Send me to the ends of the earth and wed me to the king of Mosavoy or the lord of the Grey Waste. Silverwing will bring me back to Jaehaerys." Jaehaerys and Alysanne at their wedding on Dragonstone. Fire and Blood, the year of the three brides. But here's the issue with this plan. Jaehaerys and Alysanne had been extremely close as children. So much so, given the Targaryen custom of sibling marriage, many believed the pair always expected to be married. Alysanne soon learned about the council's decision and informed Jaehaerys, who was angered greatly by the fact he was never going to be consulted about the matter, and saw this as an overreach in power by his mother and stepfather. He acted immediately, ordering his Kingsguard to discreetly travel to Dragonstone during the night, while he and Alysanne flew together upon their dragons. On Dragonstone, Alysanne and Jaehaerys were married in secret. As Jaehaerys refused to consummate the marriage, believing Alysanne to still be too young, Alysanne remained a maid. Lord Rhaegar and Queen Alyssa arrived on the island soon after the wedding. Upon learning the marriage had not yet been consummated, Rhaegar ordered his men to secure the two children, but was defied by the Kingsguard, who formed the wall in front of their king and queen. While Alyssa and Rhaegar departed, defeated, Alysanne and Jaehaerys remained behind on Dragonstone, where they would spend the rest of the king's minority, spending near every hour in each other's company. There is some debate as to when Alysanne officially became queen. Some argue as soon as she married Jaehaerys on Dragonstone in 49 AC, or later in 50 AC after their second wedding, after which the marriage was consummated. Regardless, on the 12th day of the 9th moon of 50 AC, Jaehaerys Targaryen came of age, and flew his dragon to King's Landing to claim his throne, while Alysanne remained on Dragonstone. She would then follow him 6 months later, flying to the Red Keep on Silverwing, which is when their second wedding would happen. Regardless, by 50 AC, Jaehaerys was king in his own right, and Alysanne now his undisputed queen consort. While all queens before her wore some sort of crown, Alysanne's was different. She often wore a slimmer, more feminine version of her brother's crown at court. This was very intentional and was meant to send a message about the role Alysanne would go on to play during her husband's reign. She would not be a passive consort, but she would use her power and influence to try and usher in meaningful change in Westeros, the kind of change that would earn her the name, the Good Queen. While the changes and reforms Jaehaerys brought to Westeros over his long reign cannot be overstated, Alysanne was as much an equal partner in that change, often advocating for the issues and areas overlooked by the lucky few of the ruling classes. So while Jaehaerys rightly has been given his reputation as arguably the best king Westeros ever saw, Alysanne too earned her place beside him. There is still a very good reason she is so fondly remembered hundreds of years later, and why she is spoken of in such esteem. She was all you could want in a queen, dedicating her life to family and the realm itself. She started her good work almost as soon as she became queen. Jaehaerys and Alysanne would go on countless royal progresses over their reign. Some argued few kings or queens of Westeros ever saw as much of their kingdom as the Conciliator and the Good Queen. Their first was in 51 AC, a progress of the Crownland, stopping off in places such as Duskendale and Maidenpool. Even from the first royal progress, Alysanne introduced her women's courts. They would be held wherever she travelled, and at every location in the progress, be that a large town or a tiny village. Only women and girls were allowed to join Alysanne during these courts, regardless of their status or birth. The Queen encouraged them to speak freely and openly about their fears and concerns, and their hopes. What's important here is not only was this event exclusive to women, but all women, no matter their birth or rank. For the first time, the voices of even the poorest smallfolk, mothers, widows, the elderly, were being heard and had an opportunity to speak of their problems and issues. Nothing like this had happened before under previous kings of Westeros, and we have no record of such events prior to the conquest. The lords claiming the first night now are no heroes. You have not heard the women speak of them. I have. Old men, fat men, cruel men, poxy boys, rapers, droolers, men covered with scabs, with scars, with boils, lords who have not washed in half a year, men with greasy hair and lice. These are your mighty men. I listened to the girls, and none of them felt blessed. Alysanne Targaryen to the small council of Jaehaerys. Fire and blood, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, their triumphs and tragedies. The first of Alysanne's women's courts were held in 51 AC at the town of Duskendale, during the aforementioned royal progress of the Crown Lands. By 52 AC, during Jaehaerys' second royal progress, Alysanne held a women's court at Goldtown in the Vale, and another at the Gate of the Moon. It was in these courts where we started to see Alysanne start to act on what she had learned from them. In this case, she discovered the plight of widows up and down Westeros. In times of peace, it was not uncommon for men to outlive their wives, as women die in birthing bed very commonly, and in times of war, the men may perish themselves, then leaving behind widows. Due to this, men would often take new wives, whose presence was resented by the children of the first wife, who would often feel no bond or affection towards their stepmother, often, in fact, resentment. Upon the man's death, his heirs could and would often expel the newly widowed wife, reducing her to poverty. In the case of lords, the heirs might strip away the widow's incomes and servants, reducing her to no more than an impoverished boarder in their house. While more often enacted by the highborn, this was also common among the smallfolk as well. King Jaehaerys listened to his queen's plea and enacted the widow's law. The new law reaffirmed the rights of the eldest son or daughter, where there was no son to inherit, but required the heirs to maintain surviving widows in the same condition they enjoyed before their husband's death. A lord's widow, be she second, third, or fourth wife, no longer be driven from the castle, nor deprived of her servants, clothing, or income. The same law also forbade a man to disinherit the children by a first wife in order to bestow their lands, seats, or property on a later wife or her children. Even in cases where Alysanne could not attend royal progresses herself, she would still ensure the women's courts happened, and the information gained from them fed back to her. This was the case in 53 AC, when Jaehaerys toured the Riverlands, stopping in places such as Riverrun and Stony Sept, and everywhere else in between. Alysanne sent a friend, Lady Janice Templeton, in her place to hold these courts. Unlike the royal progresses in the Vale, however, we don't know of any significant changes that occurred as a result of these courts. Arguably the most important and also the most controversial of the women's courts came in 58 AC, during the royal progress of the North. By this time, the reputation of the women's courts was known up and down Westeros. So when Alysanne held a women's court at White Harbour, more than 200 women and girls came before her. When she eventually travelled to the Wall to visit the Night's Watch, she held another women's court in a brothel at Molestown, where the same tales she'd heard during the progress were repeated. In Molestown, she met a daughter of a blacksmith, who was wed to her father's apprentice when she was 14 years of age. Just as they finished their marriage vows, the local lord came upon the wedding, with his men-at-arms claiming his right. After the first night, she returned to her husband, who lost all affection for her. Since he could not raise his hand against the lord, the husband raised it against his wife instead. When he discovered she was pregnant with the lord's child, the apprentice beat her until she miscarried. The woman decided, if she was going to be called a whore, she might as well live like one, and fled to Molestown's brothel, where she remained. When she returned to King's Landing, Alysanne brought this story and the countless others she had been told before Jaehaerys and his small council. Alysanne pointed out what happened to Lord Gargan Jaehaerys, a former Lord of Harrenhal who had died in 37 AC. Gargan was fat and considered foolish, but also a clever man. He had a lusty appetite and used his position of power to fill it. He was known to attend each wedding in his domain, no matter how far away it was, or who the bride was, to take advantage of the Lord's right to the first night, giving him the nickname Gargan the Guest. He also made free with the wives and daughters of his own servants at Harrenhal, with his own people deeply resenting him for it. Grand Maester Benefer supported the Queen's cause and pointed out there were countless instances of lords being murdered by those seeking revenge due to the right of the First Night, and thus the right was also a threat to the King's peace. Alysanne declared the law was not the same as it was when it was founded thousands of years ago, as none of the men practicing it now are mighty heroes, or even back in those ancient days when it was looked upon more favourably, some even calling it a blessing, it was still in her view immoral. Jaehaerys was initially reluctant to anger his subjects by taking away part of their lordly prerogative, but he was convinced by his wife and the council agreed to abolish the lord's right to the First Night, in what became known as the second of Queen Alysanne's laws. A bride's maidenhead would only belong to her husband, whether joined before a septon or a heart tree. Any man, be they lord or peasant, who would forcibly take her on her wedding night, or any other night, would be guilty of rape. The law made Alysanne deeply beloved by the smallfolk, though some lords resented it, mostly in the north, where the practice was more common. This is Queen's Crown. A queen lived there. A queen stayed there for a night. Ygritte and Jon Snow. A Storm of Swords, Chapter 41. Jon 5. Alysanne, during this royal progress in the north, also became a huge advocate for the Night's Watch, having spent an extended amount of time at the Wall. Through her, it saw perhaps its biggest change not only under House Targaryen, but for hundreds of years. According to Bran Stark and Jon Snow, Alysanne stayed in several local villages while flying north to the Wall. One such village was Queen's Crown, which changed its name to that following Alysanne's visit in her honour and painted the marlons on the top of the holdfast golden to look like the golden crown she wore during her visit. During her time with the Night's Watch at Castle Black, Alysanne saw a group of wildlings that the Lord Commander was holding as captives and was horrified by the tales of beyond the Wall. During her stay, she insisted on visiting other castles along the Wall, despite of how decrepit they had become. She also attempted to fly her dragon Silverwing north beyond the Wall on 3 separate occasions, but when the dragon would reach the top, it would refuse to go any further, something that is said to have deeply disturbed Alysanne, and a tale she is believed to have passed on to her husband. Alysanne suggested to the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch that the Night Fort, the oldest and largest castle of the Wall, which was too costly to be maintained, be replaced with a smaller castle nearby. She used her own jewels, including her own crown, to finance the construction of the castle, which was given the name Deep Lake. King Jaehaerys would later send men north to build the castle. A statue of Alysanne was constructed in front of the castle in her honour. It is said that Alysanne admired the Night's Watch's bravery so much that she convinced her husband Jaehaerys to double the amount of land held by the Order after having reunited with him at Winterfell. Lord Alaric Stark was not pleased by the notion of having to force his own bannermen to give up even a fractional part of their lands, but Alysanne charmed him into doing so either way. According to Maester Yandel, however, this granting of the new gift was not taken well by all of the Starks, and Maester Yandel believes that it might have influenced Lord Eddard Stark's choice of who to support in the Great Council of 101 AC. The Night's Watch, on the other hand, was immensely grateful to thank Alysanne for financing Deep Lake and winning them the new gift. The Night's Watch renamed the castle Snowgate to Queensgate in her honour. Construction would require more than a dozen years, but in the end, the Queen's fountains provided clean water for Kingslanders for many generations to come. Archmaester Gildane on Queen Alysanne's public water fountains. Fire and Blood, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, heirs and progeny. In the year 57 AC, the year before the royal progress in the north, King Jaehaerys had begun his work to redevelop the city of King's Landing from an unorganised maze of hovels to a true city, worthy to be called the capital of Westeros. Much of this involved the building of huge wide streets that ran across the city, as well as large public works, such as gardens and parks. It was during the renovation the Septon Bath discovered the waters of the Blackwater Rush, used to supply the city with drinking water, had become polluted by the waste of the city itself, and not fit for even a horse to drink. This deeply concerned the Queen, given the high risk of causing disease and suffering among the small folk, who had no choice but to consume the tainted water. Bath and Alysanne presented their findings to Jaehaerys, insisting they needed to find a way of supplying the small folk with clean drinking water. But when Jaehaerys put the idea to his Master of Coin, Rhaego Draz dismissed the idea, stating the sheer cost of doing so. It is believed that one day at a meeting of the small council, that Alysanne presented Draz with a cup of water, taken from the rush, the same water the people of the city were forced to drink. She challenged the Master of Coin to drink the water if he felt the issue was not important enough for the crown's gold. Instead of drinking the water, the king and his Master of Coin approved the construction of several large underwater cisterns, bringing water into the city from further up the river, where the water was safer to drink, pumping it into huge public fountains across the city, fountains that would become known as the Queen's Fountains. These fountains would keep smallfolk at King's Landing drinking safe water for generations, and are still used during the timeline of the main books. A ruler needs a good head and a true heart. A cock is not essential. If your grace truly believes that women lack the wit to rule, plainly you have no further need of me. Alysanne to Jaehaerys, shortly before the second quarrel. Fire and Blood, Heirs of the Dragon, a question of succession. Alysanne was a huge advocate for the rights of women in terms of succession. However, the impact she had on this, while minimal due to the nature of the topic, is worth mentioning, with her seemingly well ahead of her time on the matter. Jaehaerys and Alysanne's second-born child was a girl they named Daenerys, born in 53 AC. Her elder brother, Prince Aegon, had died as a babe, so at the birth of her younger brother, Prince Aemon in 55 AC, Daenerys was the king and queen's eldest living child. Alysanne believed Daenerys, as the elder of their 3 living children, should be the king's heir and first in line to the throne, despite the birth of her younger brother. King Jaehaerys, however, regarded Prince Aemon as his heir since the day he had been born, though Alysanne would voice her displeasure about this to the king several times, insisting Daenerys was older and should therefore be queen. Jaehaerys would reply telling her Daenerys would become queen after she married Aemon and rule the kingdoms by his side. According to Grand Maester Bennifer, the king's response would not entirely please Alysanne, but after Daenerys' death in 60 AC, the issue fell to the wayside, with Aemon widely accepted as Jaehaerys' heir by most at court, given the long-standing tradition of sons inheriting before daughters. But the issue would once again raise its head in 92 AC, when Prince Aemon was killed on Tarth by a Myrish crossbow. This put Jaehaerys in a difficult position regarding naming his new heir. Aemon had left behind only one child, Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, yet Jaehaerys still had other sons, which resulted in him naming his next eldest son, Prince Balon, heir over Rhaenys. This would cause a huge rift between the crown and House Velaryon, given that Rhaenys was married to Lord Corlys and pregnant with his child. They argued that by passing over Rhaenys, you were also passing over her unborn child, who may very well be male. But the general consensus among the court was supportive of Jaehaerys' pick of Balon, a man grown with heirs of his own, a proven knight and commander over the teenage Rhaenys, who may or may not be pregnant with a boy. Queen Alysanne was among the few loud dissenters of the king's choice to pass over his granddaughter. She was so angered about the fact that Rhaenys was passed over on account of her gender, it caused a bitter disagreement that led to the second quarrel, which began when Alysanne left for Dragonstone, after telling Jaehaerys that if he indeed believed women lacked the wit to rule, he had no need of her. Although they were reconciled, they never agreed on the matter of succession. Despite all of this, before Alysanne's death, she told Balon that he would be a great king, greater than even Jaehaerys. So it does appear she did come to accept the decision. There have been many queens of Westeros who have helped shape it, but Queen Alysanne Targaryen is rightly held up as one of the best among them, due to the work she did throughout her life to ensure the betterment of not just the smallfolk, but everyone in Westeros, from the highest lord to the lowest of smallfolk, and it's safe to say she did leave a huge impact in the history of the Seven Kingdoms, and is rightly remembered as the good queen centuries later. She was not a ruling queen, but Alysanne is a perfect lesson on how a consort, especially one with such a close relationship with their king, such as Jaehaerys and Alysanne had, can leverage their influence over their king and push matters such as Alysanne did that would often, in many cases, be issues that most men and kings would overlook to address. So good Queen Alysanne certainly is that, the good queen. But as we've also learnt with Jaehaerys, a man held up as the best king Westeros ever saw, even the best, most well-meaning king can have their negative aspects and blind spots. They are still people after all. That same logic applies to Alysanne as well. Where there is light, there is darkness. Where there is good, there is bad. We shall be delving into that darker side of the good queen in a video coming very soon.